Hello, Mastertron Tamer here, and I have got an unboxing and a project for you that I think you'll find exciting. Well, let me go ahead and show this to you. Open this up. So, what have we got going on here? We have a kit for a clock that I'm going to go ahead and put together. Let's go ahead and see what comes with the kit, and we'll go from there. So first off, a remote. This is a little tiny wall wart, USB, and a cable for it. And these look like spacers for the project. I think I know where those go. So here is our circuit card. And this is our case. And down deep, well protected, are our tubes. So these are the actual tubes that we'll be using in the project. There are 6 of them because it has hours, minutes, and seconds on the clock. And that's what we'll be using. You can hopefully see that this is a 7-segment display, meaning that we make up numbers from 7 lines. That's where 7-segment comes from. And I think that's it. I think that's everything in the box. I'm going to leave those tubes in there until we are ready to assemble them. Alright, and it looks like we have parts inside of here. Yeah, these are relatively loose. We can open this up. Alright, so I've removed that, and what we have here is a piece of plexiglass, which I believe is the bottom. We have another piece of plexi, and everything is fallen out. And this is going to be the top, because this is where the tubes stick out of the project. And then we have all the parts. We have some ICs, which are in a dip configuration. Dual inline package, if you didn't know what that stood for. And then we have the other various components. It looks like resistors and some connectors. I'm assuming this is everything we need to make this work. Alright, so the next step is going to be to solder up this board. So the company that produces this kit, they have a really good video of their own up. It doesn't have any speaking in it. However, it has little notes that flash on the screen for the important parts of this that you have to do. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and build this, and what I'll do is if I see a point in this construction that I think I can give you some tips or help if you're going to go ahead and make one, I will stop right there and fire up the camera and do that. Otherwise, what I'm going to do is go ahead and just get set up so that I can start building this. And yeah, I'll grab you some video, give you some tips along the way, how you should put this together. And yeah, that'll take care of that. This looks like a good quality circuit board. I'm just kind of looking at it right now. It's double-sided, plated through hole. So this should be great. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll get set up, and then I won't bore you with the whole thing, but I will do that. Usually there's kind of a order to how you put these parts together, and I'll be following whatever the video information says. I also have a printed copy of the instructions. It usually involves putting the easiest components on first, like the resistors, and they're also very tolerant for something going wrong. So I assume that's what we'll be doing. I did take a quick peek at it. There are some kind of sanity checks along the construction process where we can make sure things are going the way that we like. So I'll be following that as well. Okay, I'll get my soldering station set up, and we'll go ahead and start putting this together. Alright, I've gone ahead and skipped ahead just a little bit. So one of the first things they want us to do is to install the power supply components first, and that makes sense because they want us to install it and probably test it and make sure it works. So I've gone ahead and put in all of the resistors, and the next step after we've done that is to tape them because they're going to shift around. Okay, that should get them where we want them. Now we need to flip over the board. Okay, now we've got them, and we're just going to solder them. I'm going to go ahead and clip some of these because I'm getting a bit of a forest here to work in. Retouch that one just a little. And I've got one over here that got a little too much on it. did want to mention that if you're brand new to soldering, this is probably not the project you want to start with. And that's a pretty common mistake that people make. They're brand new to it, and they want to make something really cool. So they start with something very complicated as their first project. And that's not a good idea. I can speak from experience because that's what I did. Many years ago, I looked at all the projects that I could solder together, and one was a radio, an FM radio. And I was like, oh, that sounds great. I want to make a radio. I struggled. I'm not sure if it ever did work properly. So you really don't want to jump into a project like this as your first soldering job. And in fact, on my very next videos, I'm going to do a series on beginning soldering, and I'll be talking you through the whole process more than I'm doing right here. And yeah, to kind of give you some tips on how you can solder and how you can get things put together quickly. So I'll be using some really great kits that are from a company called Learn to Solder, and they have tried to cross that bridge of making something that's a little bit fun but yet fairly simple beginning soldering project. So yeah, look for those videos. Alright, so the next thing is I'll inspect these and make sure that they all look good to me. And then I'll move on to the next components that they want me to put in the power supply area. Hello, I've gone ahead and repeated the step I did with the resistors for the smaller capacitor, the non-polarized ones. And then I was on the next step, which is to put in the electrolytic capacitors. And I discovered I had a problem. I was short 2 of the 220 microfarad capacitors. So I'm sure it was an honest mistake. These things happen in kits. It was a bit of a pain because I had to then source them out. Now I had a box of these and I had 220. But this particular one, and this is going to be really hard for you to see on the camera, but I'll put it up here where you can see it. It's got a very short profile because it fits in a narrow case like this. So I really needed ones that were that height. So I went ahead and got some. And I'm going to use those instead of, this is the single one that came in the kit versus the 3 that I'm putting in here. So again, there should have been 3, there was 1. And hopefully that's the only glitch we're going to have with the kit, and we can go ahead and get these put in. One point I did want to mention, and again this is hard to see on the video, one of the leads on these electrolytics, and this is longer, that's the positive, and there's also a stripe with little tiny minus symbol in it, that's the negative, that'll be on the other lead. So they are polarity sensitive. You put them in backwards, well, you'll probably get a little fireworks when you go to power it on. So it's not typically not the end of the world, but you'll end up having to replace the capacitor. So it's kind of like the measure twice, cut once thing. Go ahead, check the polarity when you put them into the board, and then when you, before you're ready to solder, double check. Make sure that they're in there in the right way. And I've already done those steps, so I am ready to solder. So I'll go ahead and solder these electrolytics in. All right, that gets those ones in. I'll go ahead and I'll put in the next components, and we just keep repeating this process. I've finished the power supply section of the board, and the instructions want us to test that it's working properly before we move forward. This is a really good idea because before we put other components on there, we need to know that they're getting the right power. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll go ahead and power it up. Now the instructions have us install a jumper in the board. I've got that in there too so that we can get this right. So let's go ahead and do that. Get our meter going and we'll test it. Alright, they say that our negative terminal is this test point right here. You can see that jumper to the left of my lead. And then they tell us to test the voltages. Now, the example I saw said to make sure this was approximately 1.3, and that's good. Didn't say to test the one next to it, but it's also good. It's at 5 volts exactly. And then there's another test point over here. This one is critical. They want us to test it. And they said that this one should be having 26.25 approximately. And I'm getting 26.65, so 0.4 volts higher. But they did say approximately, so I think we're good to go. So I'll go ahead and work on the other parts of this circuit and get those done for you. Now, one thing they say is that jumper needs to be removed once you've done that test, so I'll go ahead and remove the jumper. Also a good idea to power it down. So, what if you don't get that on yours? Well, some common things that could have caused that is we could have a component that's in backwards. That's a fairly common complaint. We might have overheated a component during the soldering process. That's another reason why I mentioned earlier this probably isn't a good project for your first soldering job, because you don't want to run into that kind of thing. When it comes to overheating, the one that I would worry about the most, and if I was getting no output whatsoever out of my board, I would test this fuse that is in the board right there. This fuse, fuses are heat devices by nature, so it does not take much heat from the soldering iron to overheat them. So when you're assembling them, you just quickly touch the soldering iron on them. They're probably the most heat worrisome component on the board. So if you get no output, I bet you got a problem with that fuse and it got overheated during assembly, and you'll need to replace that, and then everything should be okay. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next sections of the board. Okay, now that we've finished with the power supply section, the next step is to do the components around the power supply according to the instructions. So I have inserted those and we'll go ahead and solder them. Okay, we'll cut them. Just saw one that I think needs a little more solder. All right. All right, so I'll go ahead. The next step is I'll inspect those, make sure they look good, and then we will, they want us to put all the resistors in. So I'll go ahead and get those set up, and then we'll solder those. Well, I've got the resistors and the last two transistors on the board and the buzzer. Now we're going to go ahead and solder those all up. Okay, that takes care of those. We'll get the next components lined up, and then we'll go ahead and get those soldered on. Okay, now that I've got the last of the resistors in there, so we're going to go ahead and solder those up. Okay, that takes care of that. I think the next step is the last of the capacitors, and we'll go ahead and put those in. All right, I've got the capacitors in there now. These are the last of the capacitors that we're going to put in. Got them all in the right places. And of course, this is one of those things where you double check, triple check. Make sure you've got the polarity right and all that to put them in the right places. So let's go ahead. I'll solder those on. Okay, so the next step will be to inspect those. I'll inspect those, and then we'll move on to putting all the ICs in. That'll be the next step. So I'll see you back in just a second after I'm ready for that step. All right, it's time to put the ICs in now. So this uses the traditional dual inline or dip packaging ICs. And let me bring my light over here and put this where you can see it better. So this is that typical packaging that they use. As far as inserting these, there's a couple of things you need to get right. One is there is an orientation, there is a notch. And immediately to one side of that notch is the 1 pin, and then they count all the way around to the other side as far as the numbering on the pins. Now they can be tricky to put in, both in sockets, and in this case we're not using sockets. We're just going through the board with these. So the instructions say to kind of carefully bend them on their side a little bit in, and that they will insert easier, and that is true. That will work to get them inserted a little easier. They may be a little prone to fall out. Now they make a tool, it's a little hard to get nowadays because the dual inline package is not used like it used to be, that helps insert them, and you could look around for one of those if you wanted to. The other thing, the technique I've kind of used for years is I put one side in and then just kind of use the nail of my fingernail to push the other ones in. That works for me, but like I said, the instructions aren't bad if you want to go with that way. So anyways, they should have enough tension that they'll hold themselves in place, and I can just go ahead and flip it over and solder them. I am going to use a technique that was recommended in the instructions, because it's one that I've used in the past. What we're going to do is, once we get this set up, there we go, is we're going to go ahead and solder just 2 pins on each of the chips diagonally. And then we'll very quickly heat those up after we're done doing them all, and I'll push up with my finger underneath to get them nice and snug where we want them. So that's it. I'm going to go ahead and start working on those. So again, I'm just doing 2 pins on each one of these. And when I solder these packages, I also don't do all the pins at one at a time. That increases the heat that we're trying to deal with. So you'll see that technique once I get going. Okay, so now that I've done that, and all of the first ones I started working on have cooled down by now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to put a very gentle pressure underneath the board. I'm pushing right up on the chip, and then I'll remelt these. You may have heard that audio click as it came up. Alright, now that they've all been brought up to the board, the next step is to go through and solder them all. And here we're just trying to make sure we don't miss any and that we don't end up with solder bridges. Solder bridges is where we connect 2 pins with solder where they weren't supposed to be connected. And I'm going to let that one cool for a minute and move on to the next one. And I'm going to go back where I had started before. Okay, that takes care of all the ICs being soldered. The next step is to visually inspect them. I'll do that, make sure we don't have any solder bridges or other issues. Then we have some multicolor LEDs that are going to go under each tube. I'll need to get those installed. And there's the IR sensor and the ambient light sensor. We'll get those installed. And then the last thing is to solder up the tubes. So I'll go ahead and get all that set up, and we'll go from there.